All right, welcome to episode 3 of Box the Base, your home for boxing and baseball. And today I'm here with.
Shawn Spradling. I cover international baseball and World Baseball Classic content on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, pretty much all across socials.
Yeah, so I was saying this off the air right before we started, but as soon as I started my podcast, Shawn was like the one person I really wanted to get on my podcast because I knew about the World Baseball Classic since like it kind of started, but I got into it really in like 2017. I bought the package for USA because they played here in my hometown of Miami, and I went to all the USA games. And over the last like 2 years, I found Shawn via Twitter, and he covered exactly what I needed, everything international baseball. So I'm gonna make sure to link him in the description. I'm just saying this at the beginning of the episode. And if you guys need any kind of info on international baseball, he's the perfect person to reach out to
And
or just follow.
thank you so much. I'm honored by by you saying that. And honestly, I'm really flattered. It's funny because I really got into the WBC about the same time you did in 2017 because I was just too young. I didn't really follow it in 2013 or before. So yeah, it's still such a new tournament. But yeah, thank you for your kind words. Anytime any of your followers want to talk World Baseball Classic or international baseball, I love it. Reach out
Yeah.
anytime.
So I just wanted to start off and kind of run through a lot of the tournaments that have been happening, I guess, in the span of the MLB offseason,
Mhm.
which, just to name off a few of them, it's been the Premier 12, the Caribbean Series. We're going to have the WBC, World Baseball Classic qualifier starting soon, which I'm going to be very invested in. And then next year, we have the World Baseball Classic coming back again. So if you can just fill us in and kind of let's go one by one here. So starting off with the Premier 12 and kind of give people who don't know what it is an idea of what that tournament really is.
Yeah, totally. So that's a great point, Vic. So the Premier 12 is one of the biggest international baseball tournaments on the baseball calendar, especially when you consider that no one really knows about it in the U.S. I feel like it's a very unknown tournament, or at least a very like kind of obscure tournament that not really Americans follow, because the difference between the WBC and the Premier 12 is that no 40-man roster players are allowed from MLB. And so I think that there are a lot of MLB fans that the tournament's just not on their radar if they don't follow international baseball. But it's a massive tournament globally. And historically, the purpose for the Premier 12 was it was essentially founded to replace the like the gap that baseball being removed from the Olympics left, since it was removed. I believe it was like 2008 was the last time that we had baseball in the Olympics, like officially on the calendar, before Tokyo in 2020. And so in the interim, I think it might have been like 2012 or so, the Premier 12 was founded, and started up again. So just like the WBC, it's a world tournament for international baseball that is competed, like national teams compete against each other. So it's not like clubs from MLB or Japan or anything like that. It's national teams, just like the WBC, and it's a ton of fun. You see a lot of really fun names in there, like a mixture of a lot of the top names from Japan and Korea and Taiwan, but then you also have a lot of top players from Latin America, and then a lot of good prospects and veterans in the U.S. So it's a really fun tournament.
Yeah, and I just wanted to throw out there, I guess a little fun fact that when this past Premier 12 happened, I was actually in Mexico, which is where part of it took place. I wasn't anywhere near where it took place in Mexico, but it was just funny that I was in Mexico while it was being played in Mexico.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
cool. Yeah.
yeah. So next we can move on to the Caribbean series, I guess. This is one that I've actually attended games, so I have a little more knowledge about. But what can you tell us about that one?
Yeah. So you said the Caribbean series.
Yeah.
It's funny because you probably know a lot more about the Caribbean series than I do. Because for me, I don't speak Spanish. I am Mexican American, but like I'm like fourth generation, and so I unfortunately I don't even speak Spanish. So I didn't really follow it growing up, and not until I got into international baseball around maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, like actually starting to follow it, had I ever even watched the Caribbean series. But I mean, I know that you understand this, but for fans that don't follow international baseball, the Caribbean series is some of the most electric baseball that you will ever watch, because and it's such an interesting concept that we don't have anywhere else in baseball. The way that the Caribbean series works is that there are winter leagues all around Latin America and the Caribbean, and each of the domestic winter leagues, their champions then represent that league in a tournament together to play against each league. So you have like the club level teams that are technically the teams that go to the Caribbean series, even though you can have players from other teams in the league join the team. They're technically called, like, named the country. So like the Dominican Republic is competing as the Dominican Republic, but really it's more of like a league against league thing. So it's like the Dominican Winter League team versus the like Colombian Winter League team or the
Yeah.
Venezuelan Winter League team, which is so fun because it's like not exactly like an all-star game where it's like the Venezuelan Winter League All-Stars against the Dominican Winter League All-Stars, but it's the closest thing we have to that because you have some of the best players of those winter leagues competing against each other. And it's so electric and so much fun to watch because it's like the culmination of all of the anticipation and lead up from all of the winter leagues all competing against each other. So it's some of the most fun baseball to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say the same thing. Like, it's a lot of fun to watch. So not this year, but last year's Caribbean series, I went to Marlins Park and I watched Team Nicaragua. That's where my family's from.
Yeah.
So I ended up watching like a few games of Team Nicaragua play. And honestly, I think because I'm used to going to a lot of MLB games and seeing like the traditional American teams play,
Yeah.
but when you get to see a completely different atmosphere, because I've also had the luxury of going to Nicaragua and watching games be played there.
Wow.
And when you see that in the US, you see a lot of the infused culture from these Latin American countries be brought over like to the US. Like the fans cheer in a different way than you see in a traditional MLB game. So I think I mean, if if there's any sort of international baseball being played in your state around you, I think it's find a ticket and go to the stadium. It is some of the most fun. If you like baseball, like if you already like the MLB, then I think you're gonna enjoy international play, maybe in a different way because you get a whole different view of the game. Not only the style of play, but
Oh yeah.
also the atmosphere of the fans. Um,
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I grew up in Texas, in Austin, Texas, playing baseball all the way through high school, and I was a huge baseball fan growing up, and yet I international baseball wasn't even on my radar at all. Like I didn't know anything about like baseball in East Asia, very little about like the Latin American Caribbean leagues. So when I got to college, like it opened my eyes to like how much bigger baseball actually was than I ever knew it was. So yeah, if any of your followers haven't started watching international baseball, then I definitely recommend it.
yeah, 100%. And then um, I was gonna move into the World Baseball Classic qualifiers for the next segment and topic, but I want to go back a little
Great.
bit and talk about some of the winners who won these tournaments that we were just talking about. So the Premier 12, it was I believe Chinese Taipei that won the Premier
Yeah,
12.
Taiwan, Chinese Taipei, Taiwan, they won the Premier 12 for the first time. It was a massive win for them. They
Yeah,
beat
I
Japan.
mean, I'm gonna be honest. I didn't watch a lot of the games. Like I was just busy and other things. But I found
Yeah.
out, funny enough, opening Twitter, and I saw your post about them winning and how much of a big deal it was. And it was just like, it's just always really
Well,
cool. Like
it
I'm
was
not.
crazy because like Japan hasn't lost a game on the international level in years. And so they're just expected at this point to win everything, especially at a tournament like this where the U.S. isn't full strength, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, they're not full strength. And so you would expect like, okay, well, if Japan won the WBC and they have pretty much all their best guys, or at least a lot of them from NPB playing, you would expect them to like just have a cakewalk. But Taiwan winning against Samurai Japan at the Premier 12 was maybe the biggest win in their country's history, like on the national level, on the national team level. It was massive, and to see like the parties around Taiwan on Twitter, like videos of people just like partying all around the country was super cool. Baseball is Taiwan's national sport, so like I was surprised that they like brought the best they could to the tournament, but I don't think anybody really expected them to win.
Yeah, and then for the Caribbean series, it was the Dominican team. I'm pretty sure it's the Tigre del Licey is what their name is. I mean, I feel like when it comes to Caribbean side or Latin American side of baseball, I think Dominican Republic is usually like one of the top powerhouses every year. And I believe
the
they
Dominican
won
Republic
consecutive, right? Like consecutive Caribbean series.
Yeah, I think that this year it was actually Leones del Escogido. Is it Escogido? Is that how you pronounce it?
I think
Because it was
so.
Albert Pujols' team that won. So yeah, it wasn't Tigres Licey this time, but they win a lot. But yeah, it was crazy because especially they were playing against Mexico, and Mexico was playing at home, like in Mexicali. So it was a pretty cool matchup, especially with Albert Pujols being in his like first season ever managing any team, and that he wins the Dominican Winter League and then wins the Caribbean Series back to back.
Yeah. So next, moving on to the WBC, World Baseball Classic qualifier that's coming up real soon. I'm definitely gonna be waking up early. I'm not missing a single game.
Oh yeah,
it's gonna be a
especially
lot of
you
fun.
because Nicaragua is gonna be in Taiwan in that pool.
So I'm gonna leave Nicaragua for last, but I kind of want to go through all the teams in each bracket and break them down, and maybe you can give us a little insight on each team for those that don't know a lot about them. So I want to start off with the Taiwan bracket, and let's just circle back to the team that won the Premier 12, Chinese Taipei. Are any key points that they can bring over from the Premier 12? Any players returning? What's that like?
So it's really interesting because I think that just like, and I'm sure we'll talk about the other pool as well, but in this pool, Taiwan, just like Colombia in the other pool, is I think, far and away favorite for a couple reasons. They just won the Premier 12. They've shown that they have like the national team talent to be able to win huge national team level tournaments. They are a perennial team in the WBC. They really shouldn't have been relegated. It's just like they lost on a tiebreaker. Everybody in their pool in the WBC in 2023 was 2-2. They just happened to have be the bottom of the 2-2 teams. So I felt so bad for them. But that being said, they're also the home team. Like all of the other three countries are going to have to travel to Taiwan. Some countries a long way, like Nicaragua. So, and Taiwan has one of the most insanely charismatic, electric fan atmospheres of anywhere in the world. So I think they're going to have huge, home team. They're going to have a huge advantage, home team advantage. They're going to have a lot of players from Premier 12 that I think will be also that will also be on this qualifying team. They have a couple players that will not be, that are either in MLB organizations that just decided for one reason or another they're not going to. But I would say that I haven't compared it player by player, but I'd say it's at least 80 to 90% the same talent level. So I expect them to very much be qualifying and moving on. And I don't know if you'd like to hear this, but I think it's a race for second. So Nicaragua definitely has a very good chance, but I think it's Taiwan, and then everyone else is kind of racing for second.
Yeah, and then the next team up is Spain. I mean, to me, it's kind of just thinking of the whole movement that MLB has brought, where they're bringing a lot of games to London. So that side of the globe is getting exposed more to baseball. And I mean, everyone in Spain, you already know what gets played there. It's football, as they call it. The World Cup is big. But for them to possibly get a chance at the World Baseball Classic, I think could open up a lot of doors for the culture of baseball to grow there.
Yeah.
What can we learn about this Spanish team, I guess, if you will?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope you're right, because if they qualify, I would love to see like a big spark in interest for Spanish fans in Spain. The only reason I think that that might be hard to see is because the team is almost exclusively made up of players born in other countries. So I don't. It'll be interesting. It'll be very interesting to see if they qualify, if there actually will be like a renewed interest in Spanish baseball. I'm hoping so, because they have a really fun team. Um, if you look at the makeup of their roster, they have 10 Venezuelan born players, 9 Dominican born players, 6 Cuban born players, and then 1 player from Colombia and the USA, and then 1 from Spain. So it's a super diverse team when it comes to like countries, like birth countries. But one interesting fact that I don't think I mean, he's not of Spanish descent or anything, but he lives in Spain, at least part time. Adam Jones is their hitting coach for the
Yeah.
Spanish national team. So that'll be a ton of fun to see. One of the biggest like legends in WBC history with his catch for USA. So yeah, they're going to be a fun team.
Yeah, and I mean, just to piggyback off your point of mentioning Adam Jones, I think it's really cool to see somebody like that, because I'm somebody who just likes seeing players that are probably from the U.S. or live in the U.S. a lot go represent other teams, go help other countries out, like
Yeah,
spread your knowledge elsewhere. It's really cool to see.
yeah,
So moving
totally.
on here to South Africa, which I've noticed a lot of like growth in Africa in general. Like you'll
Totally.
see a lot of just players like post their training, post things they're doing, and I mean a lot of them. I don't want to say it this way, but it feels like they come from a lot of the poor areas of Africa, and they still find a way to train baseball, play it. I mean, to give an example I can relate to, like in Nicaragua, like an example in Nicaragua, I saw kids playing barefooted with just a regular wooden stick and a ball. I mean, these people are really inspiring to see them play. So I'm interested to learn what you can tell us about South Africa.
Yeah, no, that's a really good assessment on kind of this new wave of like that we've seen recently of African baseball kind of starting to grow and be more exposed. I think that he may not have been the first, like the start of this wave that we're seeing of like players training and posting their like training videos. But Dennis Kasumba, who I actually got to meet in Dubai when I went to go to like the Baseball United showcase last
Yeah,
year, 2 years ago, he was there, and he was the first player I remember seeing pop up that like really committed to posting his training videos on Instagram and Twitter, and like you saw him in the mud carrying tires and hitting tires and like throwing rocks, and he's like catching in the rain. Like it was really inspiring, and he was just the kindest, sweetest guy. Like the first time I met him, he didn't know who I was. I obviously knew who he was, but he like walked up to me. I was like, "Hey, my name's Shawn," and he like gave me a huge hug. And I'm like, "You don't even know me, but he was just like so kind and warm and welcoming." So that's just like a side story, but Uganda specifically, that's where he's from. Uganda's seeing a
yeah,
huge explosion of baseball right now, and I think that they will be the second African team we probably see in WBC qualifiers someday, hopefully sooner than later. Of course, South Africa is the one that we see now in WBC qualifiers, and they have a couple solid players. Chris Byers has been playing on the national team for a while. He was also on the Baseball United Dubai teams because he lives in Dubai. I wish we could see Taylor Scott, who's one of the relievers for the Astros, who had an incredible season this year, but he won't be on the qualifying team. If they end up qualifying, I'm sure he'll play in the actual WBC. But if I'm looking at their roster right now, they have a couple pitchers that I think could be pretty solid. Like Dylan Unsworth has shown that that he competes pretty well on the international level. But yeah, unfortunately, I think that it's just there's still not the growth and development is not up to par with a lot of these other qualifying teams, especially when you consider like, I mean, Nicaragua has their own domestic league and there's a huge history of baseball. Taiwan is obviously with Taiwan. And so it's hard to compete with those kind of countries that have that history and that like homegrown development. because South Africa is just not quite up to par with those. But they'll still have a very interesting team. I'm still excited to watch them.
And then the last team in the Taiwan bracket that I have here is obviously Nicaragua, the team that I'm biased against.
Yeah, let me ask you then, what do you think about the Nicaraguan team?
Honestly,
for WBC qualifiers.
I've been keeping up, so his name is completely escaping me. But there's this one reporter on Twitter. I'm pretty sure I've seen you interact with him. He's from Nicaragua and he covers the team, and I keep up with him a
Fernando
lot.
Rayo?
Yeah, Fernando Rayo, that's his name.
Yeah, he's awesome. Him and I have talked back and forth.
Yeah, so I've interacted with him a lot and stuff, and I I'm excited to see them play. Like it's a lot of fun to watch a team like Nicaragua play, and just fun in general. Like I've been to Nicaragua, I've seen them play in person, like not the national team, but their league and stuff, and it's just a lot of fun. What I really hope is that they can get a lot of these guys like Mark Vientos or what was his name, Ismael Munguia, I think, the outfielder. Yeah. I hope
For
he
the
can also
Giants, I believe.
play. He was with the Giants. I think he might have signed with the Yankees because he
Yankees
got
now. That's right.
yeah. So I mean, I just hope he can play for the team. And there's a few others like Loizica that I hope play for them. I mean, I remember last World Baseball Classic just watching the game and like seeing Miranda, the outfielder, I think, or was he a catcher, who hit the first home run for Nicaragua in international like play or in World Baseball Classic history.
Yeah.
To me, it felt like the same feeling that other countries get when they see like the first goal for in the World Cup. So it was honestly really fun.
That's
I
so special.
So yeah, I mean it's just a lot of fun just seeing the team, and I mean like I said, I'll be waking up religiously every day that they play in Taiwan to watch them. I might even just stay up because I won't be able to fall asleep thinking about the games. And I'm honestly just excited to see them play. But I mean, I hope a lot of the minor leaguers and current big leaguers that are in the MLB just play for the team. That's really what I'm hoping to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that if Nicaragua, and they have a very good chance of qualifying, if they qualify and they get all their top guys, I think that they can definitely at least win a game or two, which is, I think at this point is like honestly such a massive step forward, because once you're able to win a game or two in the WBC, you then don't have to worry about requalifying the next time. Of course, it's hard because Nicaragua was relegated this time, but we see with like the Czech Republic or Israel, like these countries that they were just able to scrape by and win a game or two. Now they don't have to worry about qualifiers for another whole WBC cycle. And I think that with the top guys, maybe a Mark Vientos, maybe hopefully a Jonathan Loaizaga, and Erasmus Ramirez, a lot of those guys. I think that if you have all those top guys, Nicaragua definitely has the talent to do that. In qualifiers, they're missing some of those top names, but you still have like Juan Carlos Ramirez. You have who is in MLB for many years. Ronald Medrano is a really interesting one because he played for Spain in the last WBC qualifiers and then played for Nicaragua in the WBC in 2023. But this time he'll be playing for Nicaragua in qualifiers against Spain. So that's another fun name. But yeah, I'm excited to see this team a lot. And I'm really excited for you too.
Yeah, and I also just want to ask if you can give insight because I have my own thoughts, but I'm not like in the scene like you are. Um, what disadvantages do you think on the national stage team or country like Nicaragua has compared to like the DR? Because I feel like the DR, or like even if you look at Venezuela or you look at maybe even Cuba, there's a lot more emphasis, especially from the MLB, to maybe help those guys, whether it's get to the US or it's just more funding. Like I know in the Dominican Republic, a lot of MLB teams set up academies, and it's where they send not only the players to school, but they train them afterwards, and it's a whole like system where they almost live in there.
Mm.
Where does Nicaragua fall in that range? Like, what disadvantages do they face? I guess, or maybe not disadvantages, but in that realm.
Yeah. No, man, that is a fantastic question that I'm actually not totally sure on if I am equipped enough to like be the one to answer that, because I haven't done too much research into what MLB's presence looks like in Nicaragua, like throughout the year, and like if there's any like I guess what the camps look like, because like you said, the top is the Dominican Republic. Like every single MLB club has like a presence there. I don't know what MLB's presence looks like in Nicaragua. I think that there's a lot of players that, or a lot of scouts that are watching the Nicaraguan league and watching players. Clearly, we see that with like how many players from Nicaragua we see sign for on under like like minor league contracts. But there, I think from just my observations, there are countries that MLB allocates more resources to than others. And now I don't know where Nicaragua falls under that. But just from like my observations, for example, like you talked about Dominican Republic, obviously they send a lot of resources there. But then you have countries like Brazil, who MLB would love to like tap into that market and find players like sort of like diamonds in the rough in that country, this massive country with a ton of elite athletic talent. They have tried in the past, it didn't really work. They've tried like different things like sending MLB players or like setting up camps there. Well, they just decided recently to give out 50 scholarships for Brazilian players to like start working to sign with an MLB organization each year, sort of like scholarships that they'll like stay, like you said, and like train and do school and everything in Brazil. So I don't know. I don't know if Nicaragua has something like that. Do you know?
Not exactly. I haven't looked too deep into it per se, but I mean,
That's something I'll have to look into.
yeah, I mean, it's just something to think about because I don't know. I mean, I think like first of all, you just deal with a relatively small country.
Yeah.
They don't even reach the double digits of population count. Like they're only
Mm.
like 6 million or something. You know, it's not a big country.
Yeah.
Um, but you go, I mean, around the country. Like I've been there quite a few times in my lifetime, and you see like whether it's kids on the street playing baseball because it's the national sport.
Yeah.
You know, you see them on the street playing baseball. You see a lot of people like to go out to the stadium and watch. You see, like, not in maybe not all their stadiums, but in some of their stadiums, you see like the MLB logo very present. Like it's not
Wow.
hard to find. It's plastered on the billboards, on like all the sponsoring walls. So I mean, I think MLB is gonna. I mean, I also think the more that they play in the World Baseball Classic, the more that they're out there in just international tournaments in general, I
Mm-hmm.
think MLB might get invested a little more because I think it's a very interesting market, you know, to get into.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's you have some really really high end prospects that come out of Nicaragua, and like you see a lot of we have multiple MLB players right now that are playing in MLB from Nicaragua. Like there's a clear talent pipeline from Nicaragua to MLB, and I think it would be really advantageous to be able to invest more into the country's population, like baseball population, especially with a country that the national sport is baseball. They love baseball. They love watching baseball and playing baseball. Like it would make no sense to kind of put that to the side and not invest in the athletes in Nicaragua. But I will also say that, like you said, you mentioned this first. The WBC I think will only help countries like Nicaragua because like it's more exposure for the players, for in front of scouts, like we saw in 2023 with one of the Nicaraguan pitchers that signed immediately with the
Yeah.
Tigers. Stuff like that, you know, it's like, oh wow, like we didn't even know that this player was this good. We need to sign him. Like it gives more exposure to players like that, and that can only help the baseball in the country.
Yeah. And I mean, just a little off topic here, one thing I wanted to mention about the WBC in general and how it helps. all these countries is like somebody like I believe it was Czech Republic who had these players that had like just normal day jobs and would play baseball at night or train when they had free time. I think
Yeah,
a team like that is somebody who can benefit greatly from international tournaments. I mean, the more they play, maybe who knows, they find themselves professional players all of a sudden. I
totally.
think,
No, I completely agree. I think that a clear example of that is one of Czech Republic's best players, Marek Klup, who was one of their outfielders in like the 3-hole for their team. He's, I think, maybe 24, 25. He was one of the best D2 college players in the US for a couple of years, and then played indie ball for a year or two. And now he signed with the Tokyo Giants in Japan. Without the WBC, the Czech Republic and Japan would not have had any sort of connection in baseball like they do now.
yeah.
But they fell in love with each other, and now they have this like really tight baseball bond. And because of that, he was now on the radar of the Giants and the Yomiuri Giants in Japan. And so, yeah, so many cool stories come out of the WBC like that. I love it.
Yeah, and so in switching over to the other side of the bracket, which is being played here in the U.S. in Arizona, we're gonna start off with Colombia. I think that's a pretty explanatory team in itself. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
people know what they're about. I think they're one of the better teams of Latin American baseball. But it's just interesting to see them relegated, I guess, if you will, and not and have to qualify. What's the story with that team?
Yeah, this is actually perfect timing, your podcast, because I don't know if you were on Twitter right before this, but WBC rosters for the Tucson pool were just released tonight. So yeah, it's like you planned this or something. But yeah, we just got the rosters, and if you're looking at the Colombian roster, I just tweeted this out maybe like half an hour ago. I think that this might be the best qualifying roster we've ever seen for WBC qualifiers, because you have Colombia, who is already a like perennial WBC team. They have plenty of MLB players, and not only that, but in the WBC qualifiers, not every country gets to bring all of their best players. But Colombia has multiple players that are currently in MLB who should be easily some of the best players in WBC qualifier history. For example, Gio Urshela. You
Yeah,
have Jose Quintana, who like shouldn't have any issue like going through the like China's lineup or like Brazil's
yeah,
lineup. Jorge Alfaro, Nabil Crismat, Rio Gomez, Pedro Gomez's son, Harold Ramirez, Michael Arroyo, who's one of the top prospects for the Mariners, top prospects in baseball. So
yeah.
yeah, there's just like I said with Taiwan, I think even more so in this pool, there's a clear number one. It's Colombia, and then everybody else is fighting for second.
Yeah, and then the next team up would be Brazil. I think we've seen a couple of Brazilian, I don't know if they're necessarily born players, but at least nationality wise, Brazilian players debut in the MLB or in the minor leagues recently. So they're definitely a country that's, I think every time international play comes around, it seems like they just get bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we're starting to see that trickle into the States, which is I think while international play is amazing, I think for a lot of these players, when there's no international baseball to be played, they want to
Mm-hmm.
make it to the MLB, and that's a big step for them. So, what's the story here with Brazil?
Yeah, Brazil's tough because historically, like they don't have a domestic league like Nicaragua does, and all of the many other Caribbean countries. So because of that, they don't like if they're going to play baseball professionally, they have to find a way to get to the U.S. or play for teams in Venezuela, like some of them do. So because of that, there's not like a huge the development is a little bit behind some other countries in Latin America, but yeah, this roster I'm really excited for because, like you said, there's actually been a pretty good size, like amount of players from Brazil that are in the minor leagues. There have been some that have debuted in the last decade or so that are actually born in Brazil. Yan Gomes was the first player ever born in Brazil to play in MLB. And then you have like Andre Rienzo, who is going to be the pitching coach for the team now, who played for the team for a long time. Paulo Orlando, the hitting coach. So those are like the OGs of like MLB Brazilian players. And now we're sort of in this transition to where those guys are a little too old now. They've moved on to coaching, and we have this really, really young crop of players. So we're in this in between, and they're trying to qualify in this like sort of weird in between stage. If they can qualify this time, I think it will help them immensely for the next WBC, because then all of those like young prospects who have a lot of potentials will be 3 years older for the next WBC. And I think that they'll have a much better chance of like going farther in the WBC next time. But for this team, yeah, you have like Pedro Lemos, who is in the Mariners organization, Eric Pardinho, who is one of the top prospects ever out of Brazil. He was like the first one to sign for $1 million or more, I believe. It still has the highest signing bonus. He's in the Blue Jays organization. He was hurt for a long time. You have Gabriel Gomez, who's in the Reds organization. And then the biggest name, I think the like biggest surprise for a lot of people, I don't know if you saw this right before, but Lucas Ramirez, Manny Ramirez's son, is actually on Brazil's
Yeah.
roster because his mom is Brazilian. So you have a couple of those guys who are like either Brazilian American or Brazilian Dominican, Brazilian Venezuelan, that are able to qualify for Brazil that I think would help bolster their team. And if they do make it to the WBC, I think that we've 100% will see the Bichette brothers play together for Brazil, because Dante Bichette Jr. is playing on this team,
Yes.
and Bo
Yeah.
Bichette in the past has said that he wants to play in the WBC for Brazil. So I would love to see that.
And just a little note here, because you mentioned, Ramirez and stuff. I think it's a big year for the Ramirez family, because I don't know if you saw Manny Ramirez got added to MLB The Show. Now his son,
Yeah,
now his son is playing for the Brazilian team. So I mean, congratulations to that family. They're making big moves in baseball this year, definitely.
totally. Yeah, it's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. And the next one that I think, including myself, not a lot of people know what their baseball landscape is like is Germany.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna say a whole lot about them because I genuinely don't know that much. So fill
Yeah,
us in here.
yeah. Germany is a little tough because I think that their baseball league, Bundesliga baseball, is little tough to follow when you're an English speaker or you're an American, because it's just not as accessible as a lot of the other leagues around the world. A lot of the European countries, for some reason, their baseball is a little bit harder to follow on Twitter, and they're not all on Baseball Reference, so it's a little harder to check like stats. But so if you look at their roster, they have a lot of players that play domestically in Germany. They do have a couple players that are in MLB organizations like Yannick Walther, who is a catcher for in the Brewers organization. But for the most part, it's either former MLB affiliated players that are in Germany, or just players that are like born and raised and developed in Germany. So one interesting, I guess, plot point that will be fun to follow in this qualifying pool is Christian Pedral. He is Brazilian German, and in 2022 qualifiers, he actually played for Brazil. Now he's on Germany's roster, and they're going to play each other, Germany and Brazil, and so that'll be really interesting to see, like if he pitches in that game. I don't know why he chose to play for Germany, other than maybe he just wanted to play for both of his countries. He's born in Brazil, but he plays in Germany now,
I
like
mean, it's
in
similar to what
their.
Marcus Stroman did, and he played for
Yeah,
Puerto Rico
exactly.
and played for the U.S.
Or I'm now blanking on his name, but the pitcher I just mentioned that played for Nicaragua and Spain, Ronald Medrano. Like he
Yeah.
played for both in the same WBC cycle, so it's totally allowed to do. I'm just always curious as to why they choose to do that. Whether it's like I want to represent both sides of my family, or is it more like was there drama that happened like going on as to why he isn't playing for Brazil, or is it just like I just wanted to switch it up? So I don't
Yeah.
know. It'll be fun. They have some players that are most of them are born in Germany, but they have a couple of German Americans as well. A guy that I've talked to recently, his name's Tristan Russell. He plays for the University of Houston. There's a couple guys from the University of Houston that are German, and they should be pretty solid players, but they're really young. So I'm excited to see them and some of their like young prospects. But yeah, this is a team that I don't know as well either. I think one player that will also be fun to watch is Andre Agassi's son, who was a huge tennis player for a long time in the U.S.
Yeah.
His son is playing for Germany, so just another like family line name that'll be fun to follow.
And then the last team that rounds out this bracket and rounds out the last team of the qualifiers would be China, which, I mean, I consider China to be like one of the powerhouses of Asia, because you have Japan, which is, I think, the best team. Then you have the Koreans, and then China.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, I didn't watch a lot of their games last World Baseball Classic. But from what I heard, a lot of their team was fairly young. So, I mean, I I guess it's just a way for baseball to grow there. I mean, and
Yeah.
it always seems like they share a lot of similarities with like the way baseball is played in Japan and in China. So yeah, what can you tell us about that team?
Yeah, it's funny because I just mentioned how it's a little difficult to track baseball in Germany. That doesn't even compare to how hard it is to follow baseball in China because it's almost impossible for me to find like statistics from the Chinese league and most of their team is made up of players who play in China. I think they may have like 2 or 3 players that are American born. The rest are born in China and all play in China. So it's really tough to follow. I think that there's a clear top 3 when it comes to the top teams, the top baseball countries in Asia. In East Asia, it goes Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and then I think China is a tier below that. But like you said, the WBC should help as long as they're able to continue in the WBC and qualifiers. It should help them develop and help scouts see their players more as well. The only hard part is that they don't have. There's a lot of players that are eligible for China that are not playing for China, and so they don't have a very strong team compared to what they could. But like one of my friends that I was able to connect with in the last WBC round, I've been talking with him about the roster a lot this year. Alan Zong Carter, who he actually is going by his Chinese name. I found out recently on the roster, so I saw the roster and I didn't see him on there, and he's actually going by his Chinese name. So, but he is on the roster.
Yeah.
Him and I were talking about just how frustrating it is when there's like we clearly see like this dream team scenario of like what the Chinese team could look like, and then we don't have a lot of those players playing for them. So I think it's going to be an uphill battle for China, but they have a couple solid players that could carry them, like Jeremy Wu Yelland, who is in the Red Sox organization. I think that him and Allen could hopefully carry them to at least a win or two, depending on if they pitch well enough. And I don't know hardly anything about the offense. They had a couple players in affiliated ball that wanted to play for China in the qualifiers, but found out that they were not actually eligible. So they weren't able to join the team. But yeah, other than that, I don't know many players. I don't know much about the actual players in China.
Yeah. So that'll round out the qualifier segment here, and then getting towards the end of the episode here, I do a segment called like rapid fire questions. You don't have to answer the questions quickly. You can take as long as you want to answer them, but I just call it a little rapid fire section.
Yeah, I love it.
So I'm just gonna start off here with my questions. The first one is, who do you think are some of the biggest? You can answer this in 2 ways that I would like to see answered: historically and currently. Who are some of the biggest international players that have impacted the MLB?
Wow, that is a great question. Man, when I think about like, okay, I guess I'll answer both. I'll answer like current. You said current and historically.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I'll answer current right now, like, and then I'll go to historically. I think right now there's a clear like couple names that I think are like the names in MLB. Shohei Ohtani is easily the name. Like
yeah,
no one has impacted baseball, arguably ever like he has. And so having him and getting to watch Shohei Ohtani right now, being in like a fan of baseball in the Shohei Ohtani era is pretty incredible. Like it'll be fun to like get to tell like my kids and grandkids that we got to like watch him for so long, like in his prime, especially because we get to see him in the WBC, things like that. I think that Juan Soto, like the fact that he's still so young and just signed this like insanely massive contract is like just shocking in and of itself. I think that he's one of the biggest names. Um, yeah, a lot of the Japanese guys, especially just because Japanese baseball is just so popular right now. Like Roki Sasaki just came over, Yoshinobu Yamamoto came over. But then going off of Japan, like if I think to more like Latin American players, Ronald Acuna, I'm excited to see him back in MLB this year. It was sad having a year without him.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I'm a Marlins fan, so as much as I am excited to see him as a baseball fan, I sometimes don't want to see him against my team.
hey, that is totally fair. I totally get that. For me, I'm an Astros fan, and so he may not be like the top name, but I mean these two guys, but Jose Altuve and Yordan Alvarez are like two of the most fun players for me to watch.
Yeah,
Yordan hits the biggest tanks that you can ever see in baseball, and then I'm just like getting to watch Jose Altuve play for the last I don't know 10, 15 years has been just an absolute
yeah.
joy as an Astros fan. If I go like historically, my goodness, it's hard to like pin it down to a couple. But when I think of, and I'm probably gonna like butcher this and miss a name and be like so upset when I miss a name. But when I think about like the greats of international baseball all time, I go to like Ichiro, who just like changed Japanese baseball in MLB. Like players, like all Japanese players want to like be like Ichiro, and like for so long it was like they wanted to play for the Mariners, just like now Japanese players want to play for the Dodgers with Shohei Ohtani. Like he was just like infectious. He was so much fun to watch, just like so much joy. He was a fan favorite across the league. So I go to Ichiro. I think that for the Latin baseball, like the Latino baseball fan, there's no one like Roberto Clemente. Like he is like the name that like it's hard to think of a bigger name in baseball history that had like a bigger baseball and cultural impact, especially for Nicaraguan fans. I know that
Yeah,
there's a really strong connection between Roberto Clemente
yeah.
and
There's
Nicaragua. One of
actually,
my
if you go to the what they call the Estadio Nacional in Nicaragua, that's like right behind my grandma's house. You see a giant statue of him when you enter the stadium,
wow,
and it's
yeah,
really cool.
that's super cool. It's just like he he impacted so much more than just Puerto Rico and more than just baseball. Like his story is incredible. Unfortunately, he was gone way too soon, but he is a international baseball legend in my mind. Um, man, I those are the two guys that like come to mind initially, but I mean, there's a million Dominican players that I think could be named like all time greats. Um, yeah, who are some of the ones for you? Who are like the all time
I mean,
greats when it comes to international baseball?
for me, I'd say the obvious names like Ichiro. That I mean, you have to mention Ichiro. Like, he's an
Yeah,
obvious name. After that, um, I would honestly like mention again Clemente. He's
yeah.
another big one. Outside of that, I would look at it, probably some other Japanese players,
Mm,
like Hideo Nomo.
yeah.
He's, I think, a really big one. I would definitely mention Fernando Valenzuela.
Oh,
He's a
huge
big
one.
time name.
Absolutely.
You know, he's like,
Fernando Mania.
yeah, Fernando Mania. I mean, I'm too young to have ever seen him pitch, but I remember reading this book called Split Season, and there's like a whole
Mm,
section about him, and it's like it makes you feel like he transcended sports in general.
wow.
So yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's a
then
huge one. I think another one that comes to mind for me when I you got me on the pitcher like my mind on pitchers, Pedro, like is just such a like. I didn't get to watch a ton of Pedro because he was already past his prime when I started watching baseball. I didn't get to see any of Fernando Valenzuela, unfortunately, but like Pedro Martinez continues to impact baseball. Like he is still very much in. Like he's like a godfather to so many Latino players right now.
Yeah.
And was just like one of the best pitchers of all time. So that's another one.
Yeah. And then um, these are probably more biased picks than not. But I would say Dennis Martinez, just because at least to me, being
Yeah,
that my family's from Nicaragua, growing up,
of
I
course.
heard about him all the time. Everyone knew about his perfect game. He was El Presidente. Like I got to meet him here in Miami, so that was pretty cool too. And then
Man.
the other one, that's another biased pick, and maybe he didn't have as much of a long lasting impact, but to me, it's Jose Fernandez
Mm,
because he was somebody that no matter how bad the team was doing, you knew that when he pitched, it felt like the whole country of Cuba was in the
mm.
stadium. And that, I mean, to me, he's also like my all-time favorite player. So, I
Well,
mean, I think it's definitely worth mentioning those two. Because,
yeah, those are some really great picks. I especially Dennis Martinez, just like the impact that he has had on Nicaraguan baseball, like you said, and just like since then, like he's still known as the GOAT. But then you have, oh man, Jose Fernandez. Yeah, it, it. I remember being able to like watch his games. I never got to go to like a game that he was pitching, but just like watching them on TV, it was like prime time. Like you must watch TV every time that he pitched.
yeah,
So yeah, that was a great one. Um, for me, like the biggest international players for me growing up when I was like a kid that like that I have like an emotional tie to are Ichiro, Miggy, and Pujols. Like those guys in the early 2000s were like my idols when I was growing up. So
yeah.
those are the names for me that I'm like when I see them, they're like those are like the guys for me.
And then sticking in the same realm of players, but this time I want to ask about like big international, like current big international stars that do not play in MLB. I mean, just to throw out a name, the first person I think of is Murakami from
Mm.
Japan, because
Yeah, that's
I
good.
mean we already know he's gonna be posted soon and come over to the U.S. in what next off season, but who else is out there? Maybe some non-Japanese players too, because I think a lot of us already know a decent
Mm-hmm.
amount of those Japanese players. But is there anyone else?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's clearly some Japanese players that are some of the best players in the world that are not playing in MLB, and so we could talk about like that could be its whole own show because Japan like NPB is only second to MLB when it comes to like strength of league in the world. So yeah, guys like Shugo Maki, Chusei Manami, Kaima Taira, Hiroto Takahashi. A lot of those guys are just like are elite MLB caliber players. If we move away from Japan, Do Young Kim is like the name in Korea. He is, oh man, he's like 21. I think he's still super, super young, but is like an incredible blend of what we love to see in MLB, like the power and speed. So I think he went, I don't think he went 30-30. I think he maybe went 20-30 or so, 20 home runs with 30 stolen bases. I'll have to fact check that. But he's looking like the guy when it comes to like the next big Korean bat that we could see pop up on the national stage or on the global stage soon. Because for so long it was Ha-Seong Kim. Ha-Seong came over to MLB. After him, it was Jung-Hoo Lee, who was like the perennial MVP in KBO, and we got to see them play together in the WBC. Do Young Kim was actually on that national team for Korea in 2023, but he was Tommy Edmonds' backup at second base. So is that right? No, that was Hye Sung Kim, who just came over to MLB. But Do Young Kim is the next guy, and so I think that he could be easily like the next sort of like perennial MVP that a lot of people are talking about. And I think eventually he would come over to MLB. I haven't heard if he wants to or not, but like he's definitely the talent to do so. I'm trying to think of like other players around the world. What's his name? There are a couple Cuban relievers in NPB that play in Japan because Cuba has a pretty close tie with Japanese
Yeah,
baseball because they have an agreement, which I'm sure you know about. Since you have to defect and
yeah,
you can't like to come play in MLB, you can still be tied with the national team and continue playing for the national team and go back home and everything if you play in Japan rather than in MLB. So they have a pretty close tie. So there are Raidel Martinez, one of the best closers in all of Japan, and then Livan Moinello, who for the last couple of years was one of the best relievers in all of NPB, but actually transitioned over to play to a starter for the SoftBank Hawks. They are two of the best pitchers in all of Japan, and because of that, in all of the world. And they're both Cuban. So they were on the WBC team in 2023, and they're electric. And love getting to watch them whenever I can. But I don't think either of them are going to come over to MLB anytime soon, if ever, because there's just like they have that tie to Japan. There's like
yeah.
really no need for them to come to MLB. Yeah, let's see if there's any other big names. Yeah, those are the big ones. I think that there's a lot of like Latin American players that are young in MLB organizations that haven't reached MLB yet, but they're already in those organizations. They're just like top prospects. So I don't know
Yeah.
if that's exactly what you're looking for, but those are the big guys that I think of when I think of like, especially East Asian baseball.
Yeah. And just a question that came up right off the top of my head right now
Yeah.
for this segment is, do you find that a lot of these international players want to make it to the MLB, or do they prefer, like, maybe I'll go to Japan instead, or I'll play in the best league in my country? What do you
Hmm.
find is the path that a lot of players like to take?
Yeah, Vic, that's a great question. And what my observations are, and just from like conversations I've had with players and fans and people from all around the world, MLB is just it is seen as the top league. It is the bigs, like it's the big leagues, and so uh, most players that's the dream that they have growing up is to play in MLB. Um, and so a lot of Korean players, many Japanese players, a lot of um, a ton of players in the Dominican Republic, in Venezuela, Puerto Rico, Nicaragua. Like a lot of them dream of someday playing in MLB, and a lot of the reason for that is because like there are former players like Dennis Martinez or like Pedro, a lot of these names that we just mentioned, who like set the standard for like what it looks like to be the best of the best from those countries, and that means going to MLB. So I think historically and up to this point, that's still the case. Most players do want to come to MLB. That being said, there are exceptions. Like a lot of Japanese players, like Yuki Yanagita in Japan, is one of the best Japanese players of all time, and yet he has spent his entire career in Japan. I don't think he has any interest right now, especially at this point because he's a little older and coming over to MLB. He was perfectly content. At one point, I think there was some talks that he might come over to MLB, but like there's a lot of players that just want to stay in Japan because it's just more, I mean, it's more comfortable. You still get paid like a professional athlete. So it's not like you're not getting paid well. You get to stay with your family in your culture, speak your language. Like it's just a lot more comfortable and a little easier, but it's not like you're settling for any less because NPB is still like top tier. When it comes to KBO, like Korean players, I think that I see more players like the top players do really want to come over to MLB. And in Japan now, because of Shohei Ohtani, I think most of the top players do have aspirations of coming to MLB. But I think that there's going to be a little bit of a shift in the next couple years, maybe the next decade or two, as baseball continues to grow around the world, of seeing players look at other options more frequently and more as a realistic, like beneficial option for them. For example, I talked about Mark Kloop. Like he didn't get drafted, but rather than continue to, for the next couple of years, try to pursue an MLB organization, he was like, I'm just going to go play in Japan and like be like try to have a very successful career over there. And he's Czech, like he's from Czechia, and so that's like a country that you just wouldn't expect to produce baseball players, let alone like be like go to Japan, other than
Yeah.
like now their connection. But I think we're going to start seeing more of that. I think we might even see more American players that just don't have jobs, now that like the draft has been shrunk and everything. Like there's just less jobs for MLB players now, and the
Yeah.
minor leagues have started to shrink. And so I think that now we might see more Americans go to Japan and to Taiwan and to Korea, maybe even into Europe. Carter Stewart got drafted by the Braves in the first round, and instead of going to the Braves, this was back in like 2017 or 18 or so. Instead
Yeah.
of going to the Braves, he went to Japan, and like he's had a very successful through injuries, but like the last couple of years have been pretty successful for him. So yeah, I think that there's other routes, but I think that at this point it's still the pinnacle, the peak is seen as MLB.
Yeah. And then the last question here to wrap up this episode here would be for people in the US, how can they watch some of these other leagues, like
Mm,
specifically MPB and or KBO, that aren't maybe highlighted as much like through MLB? Because for example, like the Caribbean series and some of these Latin American leagues, I feel like the MLB does a good job of pushing them out there. But
yeah.
if people want to watch, the MPB or the KBO or some of these leagues, how do they watch them in the US? What's their way of doing it?
Yeah, it's tough. And actually, it's a good point with the Caribbean series. Now, thankfully, there's even an English broadcast, and so like even people that don't speak Spanish now we get to watch and understand like what they're talking about. So that was huge. But for a lot of these leagues, like you said, there's no broadcast in English. There's no website that we have access to be able to watch in the U.S. or in the Western Hemisphere at all. So it is really tough. There's like the language barrier. There's the just like the tech barrier. Like maybe we don't have access to certain websites for certain leagues in the U.S. unless you have like a VPN. And then there's just like the finding it, like the access to just like it's just so far removed and such a cultural difference with so many of these leagues in especially in East Asia that it's hard to even find out where to go for those. So what I do personally is I actually don't watch a ton of games because like in East Asia because it's just so hard to in the middle of the night. Like the games are at like 2 a.m. I
Yeah,
will very much watch like the WBC and qualifiers at those times because it's like only like a week or two of that, and I'm like
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not going to get any sleep this week, but that's fine. It's worth it. But during the year, I don't really watch a ton of games. There are ways to watch games if you want to buy packages, and there are certain Twitter accounts that can help with that, depending on the league that you want to follow. You're also always welcome to reach out to me if you have like a specific league you want to like get into. But for me, what I do, I actually don't watch a ton of games. I follow accounts on Twitter, on X, and to watch highlights and to like track what's going on in those leagues through Twitter. Because there are some accounts that just that will post a ton of highlights. You could follow like a lot of like what's going on in the league and a lot of news from the league, a lot of the top players on Twitter and even YouTube for some of these accounts. Those are some of the best sources for me. So just like how you said that you followed me for the WBC, like I do the same thing for these leagues. Like Yaku Cosmopolitan is like the guy that I go to for Japanese baseball. Like he is the Japanese source in English for me. Go CPBL is like the CPBL Taiwanese source that I go to for like games and stats and everything like that. My KBO is his name is Dan Kurtz. He is the Korean source. So like I have these like accounts that I follow specifically for each league. So that's what I would recommend. If you have a league that you want to get into, go follow accounts that post about those leagues in English or at least in a language that you understand and speak. And there's also Spanish accounts for a lot of these leagues around the world. If you want more of a like an aggregator of all of them, I try to post as much as I can of all of the leagues around the world. Unfortunately, I can't be everywhere at all times. And so I
Yeah.
give a little bit more of an overview of what's happening around the world rather than like the deep, like the in-depth storylines. Try to as much as I can. But if you want more of an overview, feel free to follow me. And like I said, anyone listening, if you want to reach out and ask specifics, I'm happy to help at any time. But I would say Twitter and YouTube, they're great resources. And then if you want to watch like the playoffs, like those accounts will tell you like how to watch those games.
Yeah, so I think that'll wrap up the episode here today. I just want to give a big thank you and shout out to Shawn. I'm going to link every social media that I can find of his in the description, and you guys can go follow him down below in the description. And just make sure to subscribe here to Box the Base. There's a new episode every week. And if you're excited for international baseball like I am, you can follow both Shawn and I, because I'm definitely going to be posting a lot more about it, as well as Shawn is always posting about it. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with everybody. Thank you all for tuning in.